The 84th session of the Senate in the first regular session of the 17th Congress is hereby called to order. Let us observe a minute of silent prayer. Amen. The Senate choir will lead us in the singing of the Philippine National Anthem. Secretary, please call the roll.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senators Sangara, Aquino, Binay, De Lima, Drilon, Ejercito, Escudero, Gatchalian, Gordon, Onasan, Ontiveros, Lacson, Ligarda, Pacquiao, Pangilinan, Po, Recto, Soto, Trillanes, Villanueva, Villar, Subiri, Senate President Pimentel.
With 17 senators present, the chair declares the presence of a quorum. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we dispense with the reading of the journal of the 83rd session, Wednesday, May 17, 2017, and consider the same as approved.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved.
Mr. President, we would like to acknowledge some guests in the Senate. We have the guests of Senator Binay, Congresswoman Baby Aline Vargas Alfonso of the 2nd District of Cagayan, and also a guest of Senator Villanueva, Asek Rhea Peñaflor, the Commissioner representing Visayas in the National Youth Commission. I'd like to welcome them to the Senate, Mr. President.
Welcome to all of our guests, including those in the gallery. Welcome to the Philippine Senate.
Mr. President, I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
Is there any objection? There being none, the motion is approved.
Messages from the House of Representatives. Letter from the House of Representatives informing the Senate that on 10 May 2017, it designated Representatives Yap, Ruapuno, Arenas, Tambunting, Ilago, Primicias Agabas, Velarde Jr., Ong, Mercado, Bertis III as conference to the Bicameral Conference Committee on the Disagreeing Provisions of House Bill number 5225, entitled An Act Mandating the Provision of Free Wi-Fi Internet Access in Public Areas, and Senate Bill number 1277, entitled An Act Establishing the Free Internet Access Program in Public Spaces in the country and appropriating funds therefore.
Refer to the Committee on Rules.
Mr. President,
Wait. Majority Leader.
may I move that we suspend the reference of business?
Is there any objection to the motion? Hearing none, motion is approved.
May I move also that there should only be one session ongoing, Mr. President?
So we request for silence, please, especially when we are now going to approve on third reading some measures.
Yes, Mr. President, I move to consider for third reading Senate Bill 1363 under Committee Report number 44.
So the motion is to approve on third reading Senate Bill number...
to consider.
To
for
consider
third reading.
Senate Bill number 1363 under Committee Report number 44. Is there any objection? There being none, the measure is in order.
Mr. President, may we ask Secretary to read the title of the measure?
An act institutionalizing telecommunicating in the workplace and for other purposes.
Mr. President, printed copies of the measure were distributed last May 17, 2017, thereby complying with the 3-day rule. I therefore move to vote on third and final reading, Senate Bill 1363, through a roll call vote.
Any objection? Hearing none, we proceed with the roll call vote. Secretary, please conduct the roll call vote for Senate Bill number 1363.
The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, De Lima, Drilon, Ejercito, Escudero, Gatchalian, Gordon, Honasan, Monteveros, Lacson, Ligarda, Pacquiao, Pangilinan, Po, Recto, Soto, Trillanes, Villanueva, Villar, Soberi, Senate President Pimentel.
With 22 votes in favor, no negative vote, Senate Bill number 1363 is approved on third reading.
Mr. President, I move to consider for third reading Senate Bill 1444 under Committee Report number 61.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
May we ask the Secretary to read the title of the measure, Mr. President, while we ask our colleagues to tone it down?
An act declaring protected areas and providing for their management, amending for this purpose Republic Act number 7586, otherwise known as the National Integrated Protected Areas System, Act of 1992, and for other purposes.
Mr. President, printed copies of the measure were distributed last May 18, thereby complying with the 3-day rule. I therefore move to vote on third and final reading Senate Bill 1444 through a roll call vote.
Any objection? Are we ready to vote on this measure? Hearing none, motion is approved. Secretary, please conduct the roll call vote.
The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, De Lima, Drilon, Ejercito, Escudero, Gatchalian, Gordon, Honasan, Monteveros, Lacson, Ligarda, Pacquiao, Pangilinan, Po, Recto, Soto, Trillanes, Villanueva, Villar, Soberi, Senate President Pimentel.
With 22 affirmative votes, 0 negative vote, Senate Bill number 1444 is approved on third reading. Majority Leader?
Mr. President, I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
Any objection? Hearing none, Secretary, we proceed with the reference of business.
Letter from the House of Representatives informing the Senate that on 10 May 2017, it designated Representative Stan Villarin Belmonte Lopez Jr. and Arcillas as conferees to the Bicameral Conference Committee on the disagreeing provisions of House Bill number 5159 entitled An Act Strengthening the Provision of Emergency Health Care Service to Patients, further amending for the purpose Batas Pambansa Bilang 702 as amended, entitled An Act Prohibiting the Demand of Deposits or Advance Payments for the Confinement or Treatment of Patients in Hospitals and Medical Clinics in certain cases, in anticipation of the approval of the Senate of Senate Bill number 1353 entitled An Act Increasing the Penalties for the refusal of hospitals and medical clinics to administer appropriate initial medical treatment and support in emergency or serious cases, amending for the purpose Batas Pambansa Bilang 702, otherwise known as An Act Prohibiting the Demand of Deposits or Advance Payments for the Confinement or Treatment of Patients in Hospitals and Medical Clinics in certain cases, as amended by Republic Act number 8344 and for other purposes.
To the Committee on Rules.
Committee report. Report number 87 submitted jointly by the Committees on Civil Service, Government Reorganization, and Professional Regulation, and Health and Demography on Senate Bill number 575, introduced by Senator Trillanes IV, entitled An Act to Provide Time Off with Pay for Employees Who Donate Organ, Bone Marrow, Blood, or Blood Platelets. Recommending its approval with amendments, Senator Trillanes IV.
To the calendar for ordinary business.
Report number 88, prepared and submitted by the Committee on Civil Service, Government Reorganization, and Professional Regulation on Senate Bill number 1460 with Senator Trillanes IV as author thereof, entitled An Act Creating the Sick Leave Bank for Government Employees, recommending its approval in substitution of Senate Bill number 554, Senator Trillanes IV.
To the calendar for ordinary business.
Report number 89, submitted by the Committee on Public Services on House Bill number 5063, introduced by Representatives Espino and Alvarez, granting franchise to Pangasinan Gulf Waves Network Corporation, recommending its approval with amendments, sponsored Senator Grace Poe.
Please continue.
Report number 90, submitted by the Committee on Public Services on House Bill number 5212, introduced by Representative Delmar et al., renewing the franchise granted to Filipinas Broadcasting Association, Inc., recommending its approval with amendments, sponsored Senator Grace Poe. Report number 91, submitted by the Committee on Public Services on House Bill number 5064, introduced by Representatives Hernandez and Alvarez, renewing the franchise granted to Subic Broadcasting Corporation, recommending its approval with amendments, sponsored Senator Grace Poe. Committee report number 92, submitted by the Committee on Public Services on House Bill number 5177, introduced by Representatives Cosalan and Alvarez, renewing the franchise granted to Inform Communications Network, Inc., recommending its approval with amendments, sponsored Senator Grace Poe. Report number 93, submitted by the Committee on Public Services on House Bill number 5175, introduced by Representative Go et al., renewing the franchise granted to Beta Broadcasting Corporation, recommending its approval and the amendments, Senator Grace Poe. Number 94, submitted by the Committee on Public Services on House Bill number 5211, introduced by Representative Abayon et al., renewing the franchise granted to Gateway UHF Television Broadcasting, Inc., recommending its approval with amendments, Senator Grace Poe. Report number 95, submitted by the Committee on Public Services on House Bill number 4636, introduced by Representative Trillanes et al., granting the franchise to Iloilo Baptist Church, Inc., recommending its approval with amendments, Senator Grace Poe. Committee report number 96, submitted by the Committee on Public Services on House Bill number 5176, introduced by Representatives Romualdo and Alvarez, renewing the franchise granted to Saraj Integrated and Management Corporation, recommending its approval with amendments, Senator Grace Poe.
To the calendar for ordinary business.
Additional reference of business, messages from the House of Representatives. Letter from the House of Representatives informing the Senate that on 15 May 2017, it passed the following House bills, in which it requests the concurrence of the Senate House Bill number 5513, entitled An Act Adjusting the Amounts of the Value of Property on which a penalty is based, and the fines imposed under the revised Penal Code, amending for the purpose Act number 3815, otherwise known as the revised Penal Code as amended.
To the Committee on Rules.
House Bill number 4136, renewing the franchise granted to Manila Broadcasting Company. 556, extending the franchise granted to Isla Communications Company, Inc., presently known as the Innovi Communications, Inc. 5349, renewing the franchise granted to Notre Dame Broadcasting Corporation. 5557, granting franchise to Ignite Telecommunications Incorporated. 5558, granting franchise to Golden Nation Network Inc. 5559, extending the franchise granted to Ermita Electronics Incorporated, presently known as G Telecoms Inc.
To the Committee on Public Services.
5220, separating the sitios of Ilib, New Culayo Village, Kinama, and Nambaran, Daya, from Barangay Nambaran, constituting them into a Barangay Nambaran East. 5221, creating Barangay Ipil, Tabuk, Kalinga. 5222, separating the sitios of Ginaang, Madupdup, Malyango, Lanlana, and San Pablo from Barangay Laknog into Barangay Laknog West. 5223, creating Barangay Bulanao Norte, Tabuk, Kalinga. 5367, reapportioning the 6th and 7th legislative districts of Cavite to create the 8th legislative districts of Cavite.
To the Committees on Local Government and Electoral Reforms and People's Participation.
1928, declaring June 16 of every year a special non-working holiday in Villanueva as Araw ng Villanueva. 2129, declaring July 1 of every year a special non-working holiday in Alob Bihid as Araw ng Alubihid. 2130, declaring September 1 of every year a special non-working holiday in Hasaan as Araw ng Hasaan. 2692, declaring October 28 of every year a special non-working holiday in Davao Occidental in commemoration of its founding anniversary. 5258, declaring July 4 of every year a special non-working holiday in Lanao del Norte as Araw ng Lanao. 5259, declaring June 18 of every year a special non-working holiday in Ifugao as the Ifugao Foundation Day. 5260, declaring February 3 of every year a special non-working holiday in Binyan as Binyan Liberation Day. 5555, declaring June 15 of every year a special non-working holiday in Pampanga and Angeles City as Mount Pinatubo Memorial Day.
To the Committee on Local Government.
5273, transferring the Provincial Agrarian Reform Office of Lanao del Norte from Iligan City to Tubod, Lanao del Norte, and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committees on Agrarian Reform and Finance.
5299, converting the road from Barangay San Vicente to Barangay Ilocanos Norte, San Fernando, and the road from Barangay Sibilia, San Fernando City to Barangay Ilisur, San Juan, all in the province of La Union, into national roads and appropriating funds therefore. 5300, establishing the first District Engineering Office in Escalante Negros Occidental and appropriating funds therefore. 5438, upgrading the Sub-District Engineering Office located in Carmona, Cavite into a regular District Engineering Office and appropriating funds therefore. 5439, creating a District Engineering Office in Davao Occidental and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committees on Public Works and Finance.
5356, naming the Linamon, Matungaw, Baloy National Road as the Metro Iligan Regional Agro-Industrial Center Highway. 5407, an act renumbering the 3 district engineering offices to conform and correspond respectively with the numbering of the legislative districts in the province of Zamboanga del Norte.
To the Committee on Public Works.
5372, establishing a fish port in Abulog, Cagayan, and appropriating funds therefore. 5373, establishing a fish port Lopez Haina, Misamis Occidental, and appropriating funds therefore. 5374, establishing a fish port in Oroquita, Misamis Occidental, and appropriating funds therefore. 5375, establishing a fish port in Barangay Macuyom, Sirawal, Zamboanga del Norte, and appropriating funds therefore. 5376, establishing a fish port in Barangay Hill Sanchez, Labason, Zamboanga del Norte, and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committees on Agriculture and Food, Public Works, and Finance.
Letter from the House of Representatives informing the Senate that on 15 May 2017, it designated Representatives Villarica, Macapagal Arroyo, Go, Gonzales, and Bertis III as conferees to the Bicameral Conference Committee on the Disagreeing Provisions of House Bill Number 4767 entitled An Act Extending the Validity of the Philippine Passport, amending for the purpose Section 10 of Republic Act Number 8239, otherwise known as the Philippine Passport Act of 1996, 1365, an act extending the validity of Philippine passports, amending for the purpose Section 10 of Republic Act Number 8239, otherwise known as the Philippine Passport Act of 1996, and for other purposes.
To the Archives.
Letter from the House of Representatives informing the Senate that on 16 May 2017, it ratified the Conference Committee report on the disagreeing provisions of House Bill Number 4767, entitled An Act Extending the Validity of the Philippine Passport, amending for the purpose Section 10 of Republic Act numbered 8239, otherwise known as the Philippine Passport Act of 1996, and Senate Bill Number 1365, entitled An Act Extending the Validity of Philippine Passports, amending for the purpose Section 10 of Republic Act Number 8239, otherwise known as the Philippine Passport Act of 1996, and for other purposes.
To the Archives.
Resolutions. Number 379, resolution directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the implementation of the Cybercrime Prevention Act with the end in view of imposing higher penalties for the crime of child pornography committed through a computer system, including cybersex acts involving children. Senator Laila de Lima.
To the Committees on Women, Children, Family Relations, and Gender Equality, and Science and Technology.
Number 380, resolution directing the Senate Committee on Agriculture and Food to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the presence of imported rice without the necessary import permit at the various ports in the country, and the timing and manner of rice procurement by the National Food Authority, introduced by Senator Cynthia Villar.
To the Committee on Agriculture and Food.
Number 381, a resolution directing the appropriate Senate committees to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the recent global ransomware cyber attacks and the implementation of the National Cybersecurity Plan 2022 with the end in view of protecting the Filipino people, institutions, and information resources from cyber attacks and other cyber threats. Senator Paulo Benigno Bam Aquino IV.
To the Committees on Science and Technology and Justice and Human Rights.
382, resolution recognizing and congratulating Batang Gilas for being the 2017 Southeast Asia Basketball Association Under-16 champions. Senator Joel Villanueva.
To the Committee on Rules.
383, resolution recognizing and congratulating Gilas Pilipinas for winning the 2017 Southeast Asian Basketball Men's Championship. Senator Joel Villanueva.
To the Committee on Rules.
Communication, letter from the Commission on Audit Office of the supervising auditor submitting to the Senate the annual audit reports of Lambunao, Buenavista, and Metro Rojas Water District.
To the Committee on Public Works.
Committee report number 97 submitted by the Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs. Privileged speech of Senator Trillanes IV on the public confession of SPO3 Arturo Las Cañas about Davao Death Squad delivered on February 20, 2017, recommending the adoption of this report and the implementation of its recommendations. Senator Lacson.
To the calendar for ordinary business.
Number 98, prepared and submitted jointly by the Committees on Energy, Cooperatives, Ways and Means, Finance on Senate Bill number 1461, which Senator Win Gatchalian as author thereof, entitled An Act Institutionalizing the Electric Cooperatives Emergency and Resiliency Fund and appropriating funds. Therefore, recommending its approval in substitution of Senate Bill number 1253, sponsor Senator Win Gatchalian.
To the calendar for ordinary business.
Report number 99, submitted jointly by the Committees on Women, Children, Family Relations and Gender Equality and Justice and Human Rights on Senate Bill number 1252, introduced by Senator Risa Hontiveros, entitled An Act Strengthening Republic Act number 8353, otherwise known as the Anti-Rape Act of 1997, recommending its approval with amendments. Senator Risa Hontiveros.
To the calendar for ordinary business.
Report number 100, submitted by the Committee on Labor, Employment and Human Resources Development on Senate Bill number 1317, introduced by Senator Joel Villanueva, entitled An Act Strengthening Compliance with Occupational Safety and Health Standards and providing penalties for violations thereof, recommending its approval with amendments. Senator Joel Villanueva.
To the calendar for ordinary business. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, scheduled for today's sponsorship are 8 broadcast and telco franchise House bills. So similar to what we did the last time, I will again make a motion for the body's concurrence of an omnibus sponsorship on the franchise measure by the Chair of the Committee on Public Services Committee. However, for purposes of its passage on second and third readings, we will take it up one at a time. So I move, Mr. President, that we consider these 8 broadcast and telco franchise house, transfer them from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders. The following bills: House Bill 5176, Committee Report 96. House Bill 4636, Committee Report 95. House Bill 5063, Committee Report 89. House Bill 5211, Committee Report 94. House Bill 5175, Committee Report 93. House Bill 5212, Committee Report 90. House Bill 5064, Committee Report 91. And House Bill 5177, Committee Report 92.
Is there any objection to the motion concerning 8 House bills? There being none, the motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to consider
Consider the same.
House Bills 5176, 4636, 5063, 5211, 5175, 5212, 5064, and 5177.
Is there any objection to the motion to consider the 8 aforementioned House bills? There being none, motion is approved.
May we ask Secretary to read the short title of the measures?
Secretary.
Committee Report number 96, Saraj Integrated and Management Corporation Broadcasting Stations, Senator Grispo. Committee Report number 53, An Act Providing for the Mandatory Health Coverage for all persons with disability,
Excuse
amending
me.
for the,
Excuse
for
me.
the purpose.
Excuse me, the 8 bills related with the same subject matter.
Committee Report number 89, the Pangasinan Gulf Waves Network Corporation Broadcasting Stations, Committee Report number 94, Gateway UHF Television Broadcasting Inc. Committee Report number 93, Beta Broadcasting Corporation. Committee Report number 90, Filipinas Broadcasting Association Inc. Committee Report number 91, Subic Broadcasting Corporation. Committee Report number 92, Infocom Communications Network Inc.
And House Bill 4636, Iloilo Baptist Church Incorporated. Any objection to the motion? Hearing none, the motion is approved.
Mr. President, to sponsor the mentioned measures, may we ask the Chairman of the Committee on Public Services, Senator Grace Poe, be recognized.
Senator Grace Poe is recognized for her sponsorship speech.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues and guests. Muli magandang hapon po. Today, I have the pleasure of sponsoring 8 franchise applications, 2 new franchises for television and radio broadcast, and 6 franchises for renewal. Those franchises that have expired were issued a provisional certificate by the NTC to continue operating while waiting for Congress to decide on their franchise. Time and again, it has been repeated that a legislative franchise is a special privilege which cannot be exercised at will and pleasure, and that a franchise is reserved for public control and administration under such conditions and regulations as the government may impose on them in the interest of the public. However, we have to balance the restrictions we impose on franchisees with the privilege we grant to them. We need competition in the broadcast and telecom industries in order to force growth, creativity, and improvement in these sectors. This could eventually translate into better services for the public. The franchises I sponsor today are relatively small compared to the big broadcast and telecom giants that dominate the airwaves. Nonetheless, we have to standardize the contents of these franchises with the recently passed franchises of GMA 7 and Smart Communications. As both the GMA 7 and Smart Communications franchises have gone through exhaustive deliberations in the Senate, which have included the amendments made to these franchises in the franchise bills I am sponsoring today. All these broadcasting franchises on the floor, whether new or for renewal, are now required to provide free of charge adequate public service time to enable the government to reach pertinent populations. More important, we have provided that public service time should be equivalent to 10% of the paid commercials or advertisements, which shall be allocated based on need to the executive, legislative, and judiciary, constitutional commissions, and even international humanitarian organizations duly recognized by law. We also included a provision mandating the franchisees to comply with labor standards and pertinent tax laws. However, there were provisions that we had to delete as we found these to be unnecessary or burdensome to the franchisees. For example, we deleted provisions penalizing broadcast franchisees for failing to submit their report to Congress. We did not impose a penalty on GMA 7 for failure to report on time to Congress. Thus, it appears unfair that the penalty provision not found in GMA 7 franchise is included in the bills of the smaller franchises. We also removed it not because the amount is negligible, which is 500 pesos per day for non-compliance, but because most of these franchisees are located in the provinces, and I believe we should give them leeway in the submissions of their documents. Also, the NTC already imposes repertorial requirements and penalties on these franchisees. We retained the penalty provision, however, in the telecom franchise of Infocom, as this provision is also found in the Smart franchise. For the new franchises, we deleted the requirement for a bond to be filled with the NTC, which is not required with the other franchises, especially a big franchise such as GMA 7. The NTC can also cancel a franchise authority at any time if they fail to comply. In the provision titled Term of Franchise, new franchises that fail to either commence operations within 1 year from the approval of the operating permit by the NTC or operate continuously for 2 years or fail to commence operations within 3 years from the effectivity of their act will have their franchises revoked. I think this penalty serves as a sufficient safeguard to ensure that franchisees take the privilege granted to them seriously. With regard to the sole telecom franchise for renewal, which is Infocom or Now Telecom, we have included a provision mandating the franchisee to improve and extend its services in areas not yet served and in hazard and typhoon-prone areas. The franchisee is also mandated to improve and upgrade their equipment, facilities, and services in order to ensure effective compliance with RA number 10639 or the Free Mobile Disasters Alert Act. Similar with the broadcast franchise bills, we also included in the telecom franchise a provision mandating compliance with labor standards and a provision complying with mobile number portability standards in the future. We also amended its penalty clause to reflect the same provision found in the Smart franchise. Mr. President, my dear colleagues, if not for your vigorous participation during the deliberations of the GMA 7 and Smart franchise bills, we would not have been able to come up with these well thought of amendments at such a short period of time and have all of these committee reports ready for sponsorship. Thank you for your time, and I submit these bills for your consideration. Salamat po.
Thank you. Mr. President, to give time to the other senators to study the proposed measures, I move to suspend consideration of the earlier enumerated House bills, all 8 of them, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, with the permission of the Chamber, and as requested by Senator Grace Poe, with the consent of the Minority Leader, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1449 under Committee Report Number 62.
Is there any objection to the motion? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, this is the measure extending the validity of driver's license. The parliamentary status of the measure is that we're in the period of individual amendments, considering that this is a substitute bill. So I move to open the period of individual amendments, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Move to recognize Senator Grace Poe and to introduce individual amendments, the Minority Leader, Senator Franklin Drilon.
Senator Poe is recognized as well as the Minority Leader, Senator Drilon.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Hello. Hello again, Mr. President.
If the lady senator, good sponsor, will yield the floor to proposed amendments from this representation. On page 3, line 4, we propose to amend by deleting the phrase "quote and new licenses," close quote. The current wording of the bill, Mr. President, seems to imply that there is a different validity period for new licenses. The proposed amendment clarifies that the 5-year validity period will apply to both new licenses and renewals. So we move to delete on page 3, line 4, the phrase "and new licenses."
We accept, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 3, line 7, after the phrase "quote, subject to section 26 hereof," delete the phrase quote, "any holder of a professional or non-professional driver's license who has not committed any violation during the 5-year period shall be entitled to a renewal of such license for 10 years. End of quote. And in lieu thereof, insert the following phrase. Quote, the LTO shall periodically review and, comma, if public interest requires, comma, modify the period of validity of new and renewed licenses, which period shall in no case be less than 5 years. We are submitting this proposed amendment because we believe that fixing the period of validity of driver's licenses should not really be the function of Congress. But we have to amend the law right now because the law sets it at 3 years. But after setting it for 5 years, our purpose of the amendment is to allow LTO, when public interest so requires, to extend, to set the period of validity, provided the period of validity shall not be less than 5 years. And therefore, if this amendment is adopted, the third paragraph of section 23 will now read as follows. Except for student permits, comma, all driver's licenses shall be valid for 5 consecutive years reckoned from the birth date of the licensee, comma, unless sooner revoked or suspended, colon, provided, however, comma, that, comma, subject to section 26 hereof, the LTO shall periodically review and, comma, if public interest so requires, comma, modify the period of validity of the new and renewed licenses, comma, which period shall in no case be less than 5 years. End of quote. We submit, Your Honor.
Mr. President, the sponsor has no objection. However, there is also a valid argument against it.
Discussion, Senator Lacson.
Mr. President,
Senator Lacson, sir.
would the proponent, is the proponent implying that we're eliminating the 10-year period as maximum?
Yes.
Suppose the LTO, in the review, finds it necessary to extend to more than 10 years
Well,
the validity.
the amendment does not prohibit that more than 10 years. It just says at least no less than 5 years. The minimum is set, but not the maximum.
In other words, the LTO may extend the limit to more than 10 years.
That's correct, sir.
That would be the effect of the amendment. So,
I have some reservations, but anyway, it's up to the sponsor, Mr. President. But I have some reservations on that particular amendment, removing the limitation of 10-year period validity.
the license allows the license holder to drive anywhere in the Philippines. And that is the privilege, not a right, granted to him. And we are delegating it to the government agency to determine the number of years that the person can exercise or enjoy the privilege. That would be the effect
Yes,
of
sir.
the amendment.
Yes.
Mr. President, I think this is, there are valid points on both sides. May we ask for a vote on this particular amendment?
Are you, let's follow the procedure. So is the sponsor accepting the proposed amendment?
Yes, Mr. President, I can see the argument on both sides. Number one, if we agree that the LTO does this, if it prolongs it, I think that it can lessen the red tape that we experience and the bureaucracy that they have to go through. On the other hand, giving also the option for the LTO to make a decision, sometimes they might not have perhaps the right reasons to consider for public interest. So, but Singapore only issues a license once. And I think with technology now, you can easily revoke a license if if you feel that the driver's non-compliant. So public interest is quite vague, so perhaps we can explain this further, or we can put this to a vote, Mr. President.
With the permission of the proponent of the amendment, Mr. President, may I suggest that the LTO be allowed to shorten the period within the 10-year period, but not extend beyond the 10-year validity period, but not less than 5 years. In other words, LTO has the discretion, but within the 5 to 10-year period only.
Conceptually, I have no problems with this. This is not really something that we should conduct a lengthy debate. Can we just hear this specific amendment that the gentleman from Cavite is proposing, and I'm open.
Subject to style, Mr. President, but the essence is there.
Look, maybe we can come up with the particular wording if we suspend for a while. Is there any objection? There being none, we suspend session for a few minutes. Oo nga, malangkap. Napansin ko, malangkap. Tsaka, hindi, actually, yung tanong kung you will delegate.
We already have...
Not, yun ang point ko, kasi privilege yan eh. Pero sabi naman ni Grace, sa Singapore na daw, once lang. So, ibang bansa.
Mr. President? Okay. But not less than 5 years. Ready, Mr. President.
Explica mo yung ano yung lalabasan ng amendment. Oh.
Majority Leader,
Yes. Ready to resume, Mr. President.
session is resumed.
Mr. President, the parliamentary status is that within the period of individual amendments on Senate Bill 1449, now there is a proposed amendment by the minority leader, which is being amended by Senator Lacson. So that is the situation at the moment. Let us find out if the minority leader is accepting the proposal of Senator Lacson before we tackle it with the chairman of the committee.
The way
The
we...
minority leader is recognized.
Yes, Mr. President, the way this representation understood the amendment of Senator Lacson is that we add the phrases so that we make sure that the renewal is not for more than 10 years. But so it will now read, the LTO shall periodically review, and if public interest so requires, modify the period of validity of the new and renewed licenses, which period shall in no case be less than 5 years, but not more than 10 years. That is how we read the amendment of Senator Lacson, and we accept that amendment, Mr. President.
What does the sponsor of the measure say to this?
So now the amendment shall read, on page 3, line 7, the LTO shall periodically review and, if public interest so requires, modify the period of validity of new and renewed licenses, which period shall in no case be less than 5 years, but not more than 10 years period. Mr. President, we want to place on record that our purpose in submitting this amendment is simply to delegate the matter of how long or the length of a license, or the length of the validity of the license should be left to the LTO, should be delegated to the LTO. We do not believe that the validity of the period of a driver's license should be subject to the debate of both houses. It can be delegated, and that is all that we are submitting. As long as that concept is accepted, we have no problems with any period of validity that is being indicated. So that's all, Mr. President. We are submitting that to the sponsor.
The sponsor of the measure is now recognized.
Yeah, Mr. President, I appreciate the debate on this matter. I think it's quite important and it impacts the lives of millions of our countrymen. On the other hand, although we have to assume regularity as we were discussing on the function and how government agencies are functioning, I think that giving up what is traditionally something that is voted upon in Congress should be a decision of the majority. And I feel that at this point, first, the phrase public interest is vague and subject to interpretation. We do not want to delegate power that is vague, particularly to an agency. Second, since we are still setting the periods to 5 to 10 years, then the original amendment should already be acceptable. And so, Mr. President, I would rather put this to a vote if we should just retain the original wording, which is it will still belong to Congress to make a decision, but in the meantime, it's between 5 to 10 years giving the validity for the licenses.
So
Just to respond, Mr. President, first, public interest is defined in so many decisions of the Supreme Court. So it's not vague. Second, delegation of power is power that this Congress has done in so many instances in the past on a more critical issues. And I strongly submit that as a policy issue, we should not be concerned about delegating a simple validity of a license insofar as the period is concerned to an administrative body. So, but in any case, we have accepted the amendment of Senator Lacson. We are submitting this to the sponsor, and if the sponsor does not accept it, we have no problems with putting it to a vote.
Yes. So
Yeah,
the sponsor,
Mr. President,
yes.
just a manifestation also. Recently, the Anti-Distracted Driving Act was, well, of course, was passed, but then with the IRR, there's so much confusion. This is something that the agency took care of. So I just want to make sure that there are, checks also and balances with regards to this matter. So if we can just put it on a vote, Mr. President.
So therefore, the sponsor is saying that she's not accepting the amendment of the minority leader, which was amended by Senator Lacson.
We will just leave it to Congress to make a decision.
Yes. Okay. Those in favor... Those in favor of the proposed amendment of the minority leader, please say aye.
Aye. Yes, yes.
Those against, please
Just
say...
before that, Senator Lacson is asking this representation if I have accepted his amendment, and I manifested for the record earlier that we are accepting the amendment of Senator Lacson to our amendment.
Yes, that is correct.
So can we put it to a vote again?
Okay, let us repeat the voting. Those in favor of the loan amendment as amended by Senator Lacson, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say nay. It is not clear. The vote is not clear. Nominal voting. And for clarity, we will go now to nominal voting.
No, may I suggest
Majority Leader.
a mere raising of the hands, Mr. President, so that
Okay.
they will not take much time.
Those in favor of the amendment of Senator Lon as amended by Senator Lacson, please raise your right hand.
Pwede ba left?
Those against, please raise your right hand. Okay. The nays have it, the amendment is lost.
Okay. So shall we proceed with the other amendments, Mr.
Yes,
President?
Madam Sponsor.
On page 1, line 1, after the phrase Republic Act number, delete the number 4236 and replace it with 4136. I so move.
Is there any objection? There being none, the amendment is approved.
On page 2, line 18, after the word shall, insert the word now. I so move.
Is there any objection to the amendment? There being none, the motion is approved.
On page 3, line 1, delete the phrase also strive towards creating and replace it with the word create. I so move.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
On page 3, line 2, delete the word application. I so move.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
On the same page and line, after the words for the, insert the words application and. I so move.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
On page 3, line 3, after the word licenses, insert the words within 1 year from the effectivity of this act. I so move.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
The second paragraph of Section 23 of Republic Act number 4136 as amended by Senate Bill number 1449 shall now read as follows. Section 23, issuance of driver's license, fees, and validity. In the issuance of licenses, the LTO shall now use such process or adopt such measure as will prevent any alteration or falsification of a license or will enable the LTO to detect an unauthorized license. The LTO shall also create an online process for the application and renewal of professional and non-professional licenses within 1 year from the effectivity of this date. On page 4, line 5, insert...
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
On page 4, line 5, insert a new sentence which shall read, without prejudice to any other criminal or administrative liabilities, a penalty of 1 month suspension without pay shall be imposed upon the responsible persons who fail to promulgate the required rules and regulations within the prescribed period.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Section 2 of Senate Bill number 1449 shall now read as follows. Section 2, implementing rules and regulations. The Secretary of the Department of Transportation shall, upon the recommendation of the Land Transportation Office Assistant Secretary, promulgate not later than 30 days from the effectivity of this act the necessary rules and regulations for its effective implementation without prejudice to any other criminal or administrative liabilities. A penalty of 1 month suspension without pay shall be imposed upon the responsible persons who fail to promulgate the required rules and regulations within the prescribed period. Subject to style, I so move.
The minority leader is recognized.
Mr. President, with all due respect, I have been here for 19 years. I would like to be informed of any other law which imposes penalties for the failure to issue rules and regulations.
Session is suspended.
Wait. What do you have to impose penalties?
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Majority leader,
We're ready to resume, Mr. President.
session is resumed.
Mr. President,
Madam Sponsor is recognized, yes.
yes, I withdraw my previous amendment, amending page 4, line 5 of section 2 of the bill, the entire provisions.
Is there any objection to the withdrawal of the amendment? There being none, motion is approved.
And lastly, in the title of the bill, after the word batas, insert the word pambansa, subject to style. I so move.
Minority leader is recognized.
Mr. President, we are already in the period of amendments. it's difficult for us to vote on an amendment which says subject to style. We propose, we object to that amendment, subject to style. The amendment should be stated on the record so that we can vote for it.
Yes. Could the sponsor clarify the amendment?
Because in the original title, it says, as amended by Batas Pambansa bilang, it just says, as amended by Batas bilang 398. So we just added the word Pambansa, Batas Pambansa bilang number.
Is there any objection to the
So
amendment?
just to clarify, it is not subject to style.
That is
The
correct.
specific amendment is indicated.
Correct.
We
That
have
is
no
correct.
objection, Your Honor.
There being no objection, the motion is approved.
Thank you. This is all, Mr. President. I'm now open to additional clarifications, or we can provide a clean copy for
Majority
the
Leader.
approval.
Yes, Mr. President, may we ask the Secretary to provide the members of the Senate a clean copy after these amendments have been approved, and we can take it up then, perhaps the next day.
Yes, the
So in the
Secretary is
meantime,
directed to provide all the members a clean copy of the proposed measure.
in the meantime, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1449 under Committee Report Number 62.
Is there any objection to the motion? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, may I be recognized for a very short point on public interest, Mr. President?
The Majority Leader is recognized.
Yes, this is somehow related to the the very simple bill that became controversial, Mr. President, because I do recognize the issue raised by Senator Drilon. It is indeed taxing for Congress to take up a simple matter that the LTO can do. But then again, I supported the stand of the chairman because, Mr. President, I'd like to call on the attention of the Committee on Public Services of the Senate and the entire Senate on the issue of the now controversial Anti-Distracted Driving Act. This law was lapsed into law July 21, 2016. And the IRR was implemented or released April 4, 2017. Now, Mr. President, from that time up to now, there have been numerous complaints by different sectors concerning the idea, concerning the IRR, not the law. And I looked back and checked on the journal when we were discussing this particular law, and during that time, the Senate President was the minority leader. We were really concentrated on the issue of disallowing texting while driving. That was the main issue. And perhaps talking on the phone while driving using the phone itself. And we said we should allow a Bluetooth or a headset. That was all the intention of the law was during that time. So what I did was I checked on the law again. Section 4 and Section 5 had been expanded by the IRR. Some of the issues that the MMDA and the LTO are enforcing now, based on some administrative order, has practically expanded the entire law. Because, you see, according to the comments that we're getting nationwide, the use of navigational apps has been very helpful to motorists. And then the issue of rosaries hanging from the rearview mirror, according to them, should be removed. It was not mentioned in the law, Mr. President. There is nothing in the law that we discuss such matters. When you say in the IRR now that in order to make a call, you have to find a way so that you look for an emergency bay or something to that effect, or park on the sides. How can we do that according to the comments that we have been getting? I said to make calls when you cannot even you cannot even move your car to the next lane. So, because of the traffic, you know. So, and then also the line of sight. I was trying to look for the term line of sight in the law. It's not there. So, Mr. President, I noticed that the IRR, although somehow consistent with the punishable acts of the law, the problem lies in the implementing agencies and the implementation. So perhaps this is the best time for the Committee on Public Services to exercise its oversight functions on the matter. And if possible, at this point, if the Senate will allow, if the other members of the Senate will concur, we can perhaps express the sense of the Senate that this anti-distracted driving implementing rules and regulations be suspended in the meantime until we are able to thresh out these complaints and this problem of implementation, Mr. President.
Is the majority leader saying that the LT is also distracted?
Perhaps, Mr. President.
Just one query from the chair, majority leader. Are you allowed to use your phone when the traffic light is red?
Well, according to the... No, you're not allowed to do that.
You're not allowed.
Unless you are using a Bluetooth or a headphone, Mr. President.
Okay, so they are
But you
correct
cannot
there.
text. You
The
cannot
LTO is
text
correct.
according
You cannot text kung
Yes.
nakahinto yung kotse mo in the traffic light. It is not allowed.
Yes. So anyway, to be very clear about all these things, Mr. President, and the numerous complaints we'll be receiving, I think it is just proper that the Committee on Public Services exercise its oversight functions on the Anti-Distracted Driving Act, Mr. President.
Okay.
So may I move that the point that I have raised
The
be
manifestation
referred,
by the
be
majority
referred to the Committee on Public Services?
Yes, the manifestations made by the majority leader will be referred to the Committee on Public Services for appropriate
you.
action. Thank you, majority leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. With the permission of the body, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1391 under Committee Report Number 53.
Ano yun? Yung 1391.
Sponsorship. Mandatory PhilHealth. Yes, Mr. President, I move that we resume
Is
consideration
there
of
any
Senate Bill
objection?
1391.
There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, last week we started the sponsorship of 1391 on the measure mandatory PhilHealth coverage for PWDs. However, Senator J.B. Ejercito likewise made a reservation to deliver a co-sponsorship speech today. So may we therefore recognize, I move to recognize Senator J.B. Ejercito and afterwards the presiding officer, Senator Recto, for a co-sponsorship
The
speech.
Senator Ejercito is recognized, but the presiding officer will deliver his co-sponsorship tomorrow with the
All right.
permission of the body. Thank you, Majority Leader. Senator Ejercito is now recognized.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues. Today, it is my honor to co-sponsor Senate Bill number 1391 under Committee Report number 53, or the mandatory PhilHealth coverage for persons with disabilities. First of all, I would like to commend and extend our gratitude to the Chairperson of the Committee on Health and Demography, Senator Risa Ontiveros. Without her hard work and determination, this proposed measure would not be under consideration of the August body today. In sponsoring this measure, the wise words of the late President Ramon Magsaysay, who said that those who have less in life should have more in law, resonated with us. I believe these words should always be our guide and inspiration whenever we craft laws. We legislators are not only given the responsibility to serve our countrymen, but also the honor to be put in a noble capacity to uplift their lives. We know that persons with disabilities should not be treated differently and discriminated from their constitutional right to life, liberty, and property in comparison to able citizens. But how do we ensure that they are not forgotten by our government? Through the legislation, we set the line between equality and equity. for our brothers and sisters with disabilities to have an equal footing in our society. We need to equip them with the necessary tools they need in their daily life struggles. The proposed measure providing for the mandatory PhilHealth coverage for all persons with disability is a social justice tool. It seeks to unburden our brothers and sisters with disability from PhilHealth contributions that might slow down, if not totally hinder, in reaching their aspirations in life. The bill mandates the government to pay for the premium contributions so that the disabled can avail of the benefits available in the program of PhilHealth. This will give them the needed aid to sustain the treatments and medicine which they are compelled to take and undergo because of their disabilities and sickness. Through our laws, we aim to contribute in uplifting their welfare and spirits. Far greater than gold, our citizens, including those with disabilities, are our greatest and most valuable resources. Alagaan po natin sila. Mr. President, when the time comes that persons with disabilities themselves do not feel the difference between being able and not, we can say that we have served them well. Our laws have equalized the playing field. Mr. President, dear colleagues, in light of the foregoing, I appeal to this honorable body for the speedy passage of this bill. Thank you po.
Thank you, Senator Ejercito, for the sponsorship of this proposed measure. Majority Leader?
Sabi ko payag ako basta hindi lang game 1 kasi malulod ako.
Mr. President, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1391 under Committee Report 50.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to transfer from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders. Senate Bill 1317 under Committee Report 100.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Occupational safety. Mr. President, I move to consider Senate Bill 1317 under Committee Report number 100.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
May we ask Secretary to read the title of the measure?
An act strengthening compliance with occupational safety and health standards and providing penalties for violations thereof.
Mr. President, to sponsor the measure, may we ask the Chairman of the Committee on Labor, Employment, and Human Resources Development, Senator Joel Villanueva, be recognized.
Chairman of Committee on Labor, Senator Villanueva is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Majority Floor Leader. Thank you, Mr. President. Magandang hapon po sa ating lahat. Mr. President, we envision humane conditions of work for all Filipinos. By ensuring maximum safety and health at work, we believe that productivity will increase and businesses will be more successful and more sustainable. For this cause, I am pleased to sponsor Senate Bill number 1317, an act strengthening compliance with occupational safety and health standards and providing penalties for violations thereof, under Committee Report number 100. The House of Representatives already approved this measure on third reading, and it's my fervent hope that this August chamber will also support and approve this measure as soon as possible, this being one of the priority measures of the government. Mr. President, napaka-importante po ng panukalang ito sapagkat buhay at kaligtasan ng manggagawa ang nakataya sa pagpapabaya. Integridad ng mga negosyo ang nalalagay sa alanganin sa tuwing may aksidente o peligro sa trabaho. Kung ligtas at malusog ang ating manggagawa, magiging mas maayos ang kanilang trabaho. Mas lalago po ang negosyo. Mas lalakas ang ekonomiya ng ating bansa. Mr. President, no one should be expected to risk life in return for a contract of employment. Deaths, injuries, and illnesses due to unsafe or unhealthy workplaces affect both workers and employers. The pain and suffering caused by these accidents and illnesses to workers, their families, and to the nation is incalculable. Just a few days ago, Mr. President, a 3-hour fire gutted the warehouse of Yokohama Tire Philippines, a tire factory in Clark, Pampanga. Up to now, the cause of the fire has not yet been determined. Last February, the House Technology Industry, or HTI, burned for 46 hours due to mechanical accident. HTI is the biggest employer in Cavite Export Processing Zone with over 15,000 workers. The fire left behind 5 deaths, Mr. President, and a total of 125 injured workers, not to mention the cost of damage estimated to reach 12 to 15 billion pesos. Isa po sa mga manggagawang nasawi dahil sa sunog sa HTI ay si Alex Lerog, 33 taong gulang. Matapos masunog ang mahigit 60% ng kanyang katawan. Line leader po sa factory ng HTI si Alex, Tubong Monica, Surigao del Sur. Ang haligi ng tahanan ng mga Lerog, nagbuwis ng buhay sa trahedyang naganap pa mismo sa kanilang lugar paggawa. Lugar na dapat sana'y nagsisiguro sa kanilang kaligtasan habang ginagampanan ang kanilang mga gawain sa kumpanya. Mr. President, in November 2016, 2 children were killed and 5 others were injured when a firework factory exploded in my home province, Santa Maria, Bulacan. In May 2015, 72 workers perished at the massive fire that razed the 2-story factory building of Kentex Manufacturing in Valenzuela City. In July 2015, 9 workers were buried when the open-pit coal mine of Semirara Mining Corporation collapsed. In January 2011, 10 construction workers plunged to their deaths in an accident at the construction site of the Eaton Residences in Makati City. Workers fell from as high as the 34th floor to the 7th floor after the service elevator carrying them collapsed. They were installing a glass panel at the time of the accident. Mr. President, these tragedies are preventable through the implementation of sound prevention, reporting, and inspection practices. Actions should be taken by the government and within enterprises to promote occupational safety and health and to improve working conditions. According to DOLE, from January of 2014 to October 2016, there were reported 199 fatal workplace accidents and 232 non-fatal accidents. These numbers show the poor state of compliance with the occupational safety and health standards. Despite the fact that workplace accidents would always prompt tighter regulations, compliance by all industries continue to be an issue. Mr. President, diseases or chronic illnesses also hound our workers. Back pain, hypertension, peptic ulcer, stroke, tuberculosis, cataracts, deafness, and the multiple of chronic ailments that arise from exposure to chemicals and other hazards in the course of work. The survey of the Philippine Statistics Authority in October 2015 showed that occupational diseases in establishments employing 20 or more workers doubled in 2013 at 171,787 from only 85,483 in 2011. Cases of occupational diseases increased in 11 industry groups, with high increases occurring in mining and quarrying, construction, administrative and support service activities, and information and communications. Nakakaawa po, Mr. President, ang mga manggagawa na nagkakasakit dulot ng kanilang trabaho na pwede naman po sanang maiwasan kung tatalima lang tayo sa mga alituntunin para sa kaligtasan at kalusugan sa mga lugar paggawa. Mr. President, your committee believes that non-compliance with occupational safety and health standards is a crime, a reckless endangerment that should not be tolerated. Sadly, Mr. President, for the longest time, there are no fines or penalties meted out for the violation of occupational health and safety standards. Again, there are no fines, Mr. President, no penalties. The DOLE Regional Director can only issue a work stoppage order in cases of imminent danger that would result to disabling security, injury, pursuant to Article 128 of the Labor Code. The 42-year-old Labor Code of the Philippines, as amended, does not declare unlawful violations of OSHS, which makes Article 288 of the Code inapplicable. Mr. President, Senate Bill number 1317 seeks to amend the Labor Code to emphasize the importance of OSH, outlining the rights and obligations of the employer and workers and the responsible government agencies. Mr. President, we have witnessed a massive changes in our workplaces brought about by the dynamism of work processes and innovations in products, services, and technologies. It's It's about time that we modernize the labor code, specifically the occupational safety and health standards, which does not yet contain criminal penalties. Let's make OSH attuned to the times. Let's make safety and health in the workplace work for all. For this reason, Mr. President, Senate Bill number 1317 provides penalties for non-compliance with OSH. This is to reiterate that violations of OSH standards are deliberate disrespect of the well-being of our workers and derogation of the right to humane conditions of work. The proposed administrative penalty of 100,000 pesos for every day of non-correction of violation intends to bring about immediate correction. The proposed measure also guarantees the payment of workers' wages or income during work stoppage or suspension of operation due to imminent danger as a result of the employer's violation or fault. Kung mapatigil ang trabaho o masuspindi ang kumpanya dahil po sa kapabayaan, karapatan po ng mga manggagawa na makatanggap pa rin sila ng tuloy-tuloy na kanilang sweldo. Ginagarantya po ito ng panukalang batas na ito, Mr. President. Furthermore, the bill outlines the duties and responsibilities of all stakeholders, and including a coordinative mechanism for interagency harmonization of functions and mandates on occupational safety and health of the 9 concerned government agencies. Mr. President, since a large part of this proposed measure deals with enforcement and inspection, the role of labor law compliance officers is a crucial aspect in achieving the intent of the measure. We are glad to hear that DOLE has increased the number of its labor law compliance officers, now with 574 plantilla officers. This figure is close to the ILO recommended whole year work standard ratio enforcement of 1 compliance officer for every 120 establishments. Early this year, Mr. President, the DOLE has also requested for an additional budget to hire additional 200 compliance officers. Once granted, this will bring the number of labor law compliance officers to 774. In this light, Mr. President, the bill seeks to complement the role of our labor law compliance officers by requiring a safety and health program that contains policies in all establishments, projects, sites, and all other places where work is being undertaken. It shall be enforced by full-time safety officers who shall undergo the mandatory training on basic occupational safety and health as prescribed by the DOLE. The bill also seeks to professionalize, upgrade, and update the level of competence of workers in all critical occupations or jobs that affect people's lives and safety through the mandatory competency assessment and certification by TESDA. Mr. President, it is not enough that we express our heartfelt sympathy to those who were killed in workplace accidents or those who suffered workplace injuries or illnesses. We need a proactive approach to help employers, workers, and the government find and fix workplace hazards before workers are hurt. We need a law that places a premium on safety and health in all workplaces. Let's make safety and health in the workplace work for all. Again, Mr. President, I urge our colleagues' support. Let us all work together to ensure the immediate passage of OSH Bill. Ipasa po natin ang Senate Bill number 1317 upang maipatupad po ang mga pamantayan sa ligtas at maayos na lugar ng paggawa sa lahat ng lugar, oras at pagkakataon para sa kapakinabangan ng lahat. Maraming salamat po. Tagpalain tayong lahat ng ating Panginoong Diyos.
Thank you, Mr. President. To give time to the other senators to study the proposed measure, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1317 under Committee Report 100.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move that we elect the members of the Bicameral Conference of Senate Bill number 14 and House Bill 5513 on the disagreeing provisions. Chairman is Senator Drilon, members Angara, Villanueva.
What bill is this?
Senate Bill number 14, this is the revised penal code, Mr. President. Amendments to the revised
Is
penal
there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Thank you. There will be a meeting Thursday, May 25, to inform the members at 9:30 a.m., Committee Room number 2, Mr. President. I also move to elect the Senate conferees to the completing provisions of the Senate and House versions of the Universal Access to Tertiary Education, The co-chairs are Senators Escudero and Aquino, and members Recto Gatchalian, Mr. President. So moved.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to resume consideration of PS Resolution 213 under Committee Report Number 78.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, last week we started the sponsorship of PS Resolution 213, or the measure on model of operation and regulation of the telecommunications industry. However, considering the length of the speech, the sponsor decided to divide its delivery into two parts. With that, I move to recognize the sponsor, Chair of the Committee on Economic Affairs, Senator Win Gatchalian, to deliver part 2 of his sponsorship speech.
Senator Gatchalian is recognized to
Thank you,
deliver
Mr.
part 2.
President. Good afternoon to everyone. Good afternoon to my dear colleagues. I have the honor to present part 2 of this report, which will outline the key policy recommendation and legislative propositions based on the synthesis of our learnings from the 3 public hearings. It was indeed fulfilling on the part of the Committee on Economic Affairs to have been able to gain a more informed understanding of the telecommunications industry through this legislative inquiry. I had only one thing in mind when I filed the proposed Senate Resolution number 213 to fulfill a campaign promise that if I get elected, I would work to improve telecommunications services in the country. But this legislative inquiry made me realize that this cause is more pressing, more important, and a lot more profound than I have imagined. According to the 2016 World Development Report, we are in the middle of the greatest information and communications revolution in human history. To describe such revolution in numbers, the World Development Report states that more than 40% of the world's population has access to internet, with new users coming online every day. Among the poorest 20% of households, nearly 7 out of 10 have a mobile phone. It observes that the poorest households are more likely to have access to mobile phones than to toilets or clean water. These rapid technological changes do not merely bring more choices and greater convenience to us. They provide and expand opportunities that were previously out of reach to the poor and disadvantaged, thereby creating prosperous and inclusive societies. In Kenya, for example, the cost of sending remittances dropped by up to 90% when the M-Pesa digital payment system was introduced. On the other hand, the world's 1 billion persons with disabilities can now lead more productive lives with the help of text, voice, and video communication. For women, they can now participate more easily in the labor market as e-commerce entrepreneurs, in online work, or in business process outsourcing. Such developmental benefits derived from using these technologies have come to be known as digital dividends. But when their aggregate impacts fall short and gets unevenly distributed, they create a so-called digital divide. We need to close this digital divide in order for everyone, everywhere, to get the most out of the digital revolution. And I hope that this is the goal our respective legislations will be able to achieve, especially in the telecommunications industry. Please allow me then to share the following key recommendations that were called and crafted from our 3 public hearings. As legislators, our individual approaches to our respective legislation may be different, but I hope that sharing these propositions will be useful in shaping or reshaping our advocacies on the telecommunications industry. First, on regulation. The end goal of regulation should be to promote the paramount welfare of the consumer by assuring the availability of genuine options, quality services, and reasonable prices. Our public hearings exposed that the National Telecommunications Commission is organizationally handicapped to fulfill its regulatory function. Due to the agency's lack of fiscal autonomy and its commissioners' lack of security of tenure, the NTC's supposed independent cloak has always been eclipsed by an avatar of regulatory capture. Confronted by the problem of weak regulation, the most urgent key reform is to empower and strengthen the NTC to enable it to freely create an environment of regulatory certainty and operational conditions that are necessary to promote the paramount welfare of the consumer. This specific reform necessarily requires clothing the NTC with independence by giving it fiscal autonomy as well as giving its consumers a fixed term of office in order to eliminate their vulnerability to all forms of pressure, harassment, or even threats of litigation. The NTC also needs what I would loosely call as superpowers to effectively carry out its regulatory mandate over now very powerful players in the telecommunications industry. This would entail a review of Republic Act number 7925 or the Public Telecommunications Policy Act of the Philippines. To give an example, RA 7925 does not have a penal provision. Hence, what we use are the penal provisions under Commonwealth Act number 146 or the Public Service Act, which provides under Section 21 that any violation of the terms and conditions of any certificate, orders, decisions, or regulations of the NTC shall be fined by not more than 200 peso a day until the violation is corrected. This penalty is at best a mere token gesture for non-compliance to NTC regulation. This 200 peso a day fine under CA 146 was enacted in 1936 and has never been increased to a level considering inflation nor adjusted to make it a real deterrent to erring telecommunication companies. It is time to give the NTC more teeth to better regulate the industry, as it is only with effective regulation that we can ensure that profit orientation of the telcos is tempered by the welfare of the consumer. On the issue of competition, based on the committee's findings, the present state of the telecommunications industry does not allow the realization of the policies and objectives of the national competition law. Last week, I explained under Part 1 of this report why there is not enough spectrum left for a third player to enter and compete viably. This is due to the monopolization of the workhorse frequencies by Globe and Smart, leaving the hypothetical third player to be able to offer only data-driven services. It will not be able to provide services for calls and texts at par with the array of services offered by the duopoly. The co-use agreement of the 700 MHz spectrum by Globe and Smart has resulted in a spectrum split between the duopoly, further crowding out other viable players in the telecommunications industry. We have recently heard a lot of noise about relaxing constitutional restrictions to allow foreign firms to enter the telecommunications industry. The foreign telco, eyed as the third player, is seen as the magic formula that will compete against the duopoly, providing better services and offering lower rates. Unfortunately, there will be no competition until this third player, it be foreign or domestic, can be allocated enough frequencies that it can use to offer real competition and give consumers the best value for their money. This leads us to the third issue. How can our system of spectrum allocation increase competition in the telecommunications industry? The following key recommendations were given during the legislative inquiry. We need to develop a more transparent system of spectrum allocation, assignment, reallocation, and refarming, as well as promote and implement a competitive selection process in the allocation of our publicly owned spectrum. The allocation system must be improved in a manner that best serves the public interest and the promotion of greater competition in the market. The current spectrum lockout can be remedied by spectrum refarming or spectrum reallocation. It is the Filipino people, not the telcos, who own the spectrum as part of national patrimony. The telcos are only licensed to use the spectrum. Section 4C of RA 7925 states that the radio frequency spectrum is a scarce public resource that shall be administered in the public interest. The government shall allocate the spectrum to service providers who will use it efficiently and effectively to meet public demand for telecommunication service and may avail of new and cost-effective technologies in the use of methods for its utilization. Section 15 of the same law provides that where demand for specific frequencies exceeds availability, the Commission shall hold open tenders for the same and ensure wider access to this limited resource. Despite aforementioned provisions of the law, the dismal state of the telecommunications industry has never impelled the NTC to recall a single spectrum from the telcos. The very slow yet very expensive telecommunication services that every consumer has to put up with has never motivated the NTC to recall from the duopoly this spectrum that is not being used to efficiently and effectively meet public demand for telecommunication service. We are thus confronted with a situation where spectrum in this country, unless privately traded outside RA 7925, has been allocated to telco firms, were never recalled by the NTC or refarmed to other entities. It is time that we impose policies setting specific durations for spectrum use as well as clear service standards for telco firms to comply with as a condition for the continued use of the spectrum. Mr. President, these were the key policy recommendations gathered from our legislative inquiry. There were other equally valid propositions raised in the public hearings, like the number portability, open access, convergence, interconnection, and cross-subsidy. But we chose to concentrate on the issues which we believe need to take precedence for now. I hope that my two-part report on this legislative inquiry has able to convince my esteemed college to legislate and bridge the digital divide in telecommunications. Mr. President, I respectfully recommend the adoption of the summary of our key findings and recommendation. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Gatchalian, the Majority Leader. Suspended, 1 minute suspension. Suspend ko lang ba? Next natin. Up muna tayo, suspend ko lang, wala pang...
Grabe yung IRR.
Lahat pinakailaman.
Oh, hindi naman.
Ready
Session
to
is resumed.
Mr. President, to give time to the members to study the proposed resolution, I move that we suspend consideration of PS Resolution 213 under Committee Report 78.
Is there any objection? The chair hears none. The motion of the Majority Leader is carried.
With the permission of the body, I move to transfer from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders, Senate Bill 575 under Committee Report number 87.
Is there any objection? Chair hears none. Motion is carried.
I move to consider Senate Bill 575 under Committee Report 87.
Is there any objection? Chair hears none. Motion is carried.
Ask Secretary to read the title of the measure.
Secretary is directed.
An act to provide time off with pay for employees who donate organ, bone marrow, blood, or blood platelets.
Mr. President, to sponsor the measure, may we ask the Chairman of the Committee on Civil Service, Government Reorganization, and Professional Regulation, Senator Antonio Trillanes IV, be recognized.
Senator Trillanes is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on Civil Service, Government Reorganization, and Professional Regulation has the honor to sponsor Senate Bill number 575 under Committee Report number 87, otherwise known as Organ Donor Leave Act of 2007. Mr. President, organ donation has become a necessity in this fast-changing world. According to the World Health Organization, despite the frequent use of organs donated by deceased donors, donations from living donors are necessary for some types of transplants, despite the fact that it involves health and life risk for living donors. While this is the case, according to the Philippine Council for Health Research and Development, this compassionate act has not fully gained ground in the country due to cultural apprehensions, misinformation, or lack of information. One of the many reasons for this is the government's lack of support in disseminating the proper information and facilitating the actual process. Pushing for this measure is one way of addressing this concern. This bill seeks to recognize employees who willingly offer organ, bone marrow, blood, and blood platelets by granting them entitlement to organ donor leave with pay. Under this act, participating employees shall be given a 30-day leave in any 12-month period for donors of organ and bone marrow, 1-day leave for blood donors every 56 days, and 2-day leave for blood platelet donors. These periods are in accordance with appropriate medical standards established by the Philippine National Red Cross, Philippine Blood Coordinating Council, and other nationally recognized blood collection units. The donor must be employed by an agency for a period of at least 6 months before he or she could be granted organ donor leave with pay, which could only be used after obtaining approval from the employee's respective agency. Further, he or she may avail of this donor leave without the prerequisite of using his or her accumulated sick or vacation leaves. Mr. President, by giving incentives to our organ donors, we also instill consciousness and encourage the act of organ donation as selfless humanitarian act. Ultimately, this is also a way of promoting healthcare in the country that could save the lives and improve the quality of life of our ailing kababayans. It is in this regard that I encourage our colleagues to support the immediate passage of this important measure. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Trillanes. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. To give time to the senators to study the bill, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 575 under Committee Report 87.
Is there any objection? Chair hears none. The motion is carried.
Mr. President, with the permission of the body again, I move to resume, I move to transfer from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special order Senate Bill 1460 under Committee Report 88.
Is there an objection? Chair hears none. Motion is carried.
I move to consider Senate Bill 1460 under Committee Report number 88.
Is there an objection? Chair hears none. Motion is carried.
Yeah, Secretary to read the title of the measure.
Secretary General is so directed.
An act creating the sick leave bank for government employees.
Mr. President, to sponsor the measure, may we ask the Chairman of the Committee on Civil Service, Government Organization, Professional Regulation, Senator Antonio Trillanes IV, be recognized.
Senator Trillanes is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on Civil Service, Government Reorganization, and Professional Regulation has the honor to sponsor Senate Bill number 1460 under Committee Report number 88, otherwise known as Sick Leave Bank Act. Mr. President, the sick leave benefit has been one of the many benefits being enjoyed by our employees in the public sector, which benefit they earn in the course of their employment. based on a study of a multinational services network, Asians, including Filipinos, only file an average of 2 sick leaves per year. It is unfortunate, however, that there are a number of employees who are forced to exhaust their leave credits and continue to be on extended leave without compensation, particularly in situations when they experience serious illness or injury. When a sick or injured government employee is forced to go on leave without pay, he or she is left with no means not only to take care of his family, but also to provide for his or her own health care, medication, and or recovery. This could be devastating not only for the employee, but also for his family. It is in this light that your committee seeks to introduce and institutionalize the concept of providing for a sick leave bank for all government employees who have been in the service for a period of at least 6 months. Under this proposal, government employees may voluntarily join the sick leave bank by depositing 3 full days of accrued sick leave in the sick leave bank. To maintain his or her account, they must maintain at least 5 sick leave days in his sick leave bank. Sick leave deposited in the sick leave bank can only be used by participating employees in the agency who have exhausted their vacation time, sick leave and compensated time off, and only for the purpose of the employee's personal illness or injury. However, the participating employees are not allowed to receive any benefits from the sick leave bank during any period the member is receiving disability benefits from the Social Security or workers' compensation. The same is true in case that they receive benefits for the job or service-related injury or illness that is subject to the same grant. Participating employees who transfer from one agency to another may transfer their participation in the sick leave bank. Anyone who cancels their participation in the sick leave bank shall not be eligible to withdraw the sick leave time they contributed to the pool. In cases of termination, retirement, or death, neither a participating employee nor the employee's estate shall be entitled to payment for the unused sick leave deposited in the sick leave bank. Mr. President, this concept of sick leave bank is not a new concept. In fact, as early as the 1980s, certain states in the United States have been using this concept both in their public and private sectors. It is the aim of this committee to introduce this mechanism in the public sector with the end in view that those in the private sector may follow suit later. Mr. President, this committee believes that there is a need to provide the improved quality of life for our government employees, and a simple benefit enhancement scheme like this, which would not impose any additional cost to the government, would definitely go a long way. It is, after all, the government's duty to continue to look after its employees' welfare by trying to find ways to help alleviate their situation, including those who suffer serious injury or extended illnesses. In view of the foregoing, I hope that our colleagues will support the immediate passage of the measure. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Trillanes. Majority Leader.
Yes, Mr. President, to give time to the members to study the proposed measure, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1460 under Committee Report 88.
Is there any objection? Chair hears none. Motion is carried.
Mr. President, I move to transfer from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders, Senate Bill 1459 under Committee Report number 86.
Is there any objection? Chair hears none. Motion is carried.
Move to consider Senate Bill 1459 under Committee Report 86.
Is there any objection? Chair hears none. Motion is carried.
May we ask the Secretary to read the title of the measure?
So directed.
An act strengthening the secure transactions legal framework in the Philippines, which shall provide for the creation, perfection, determination of priority, establishment of a centralized notice registry, and enforcement of security interests in personal property and for other purposes.
Mr. President, to sponsor the measure, may we ask the Chairman of the Committee on Banks, Financial Institutions and Currencies, Senator Chis Escudero, be recognized, and thereafter Senator Bam Aquino will co-sponsor the measure.
Senator Escudero is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Hindi to po kasing haba ng sponsorship speech kanina. 2 pages lang po ito. Mr. President, as Chairman of the Committee on Banks and Financial Institutions and Currencies, this representation humbly submits to this chamber Senate Bill number 1459 under Committee Report number 86. According to the 2015 Philippine Statistics Authority data, there are 839 micro, small, and medium enterprises, MSMEs, established in the Philippines. These MSMEs generated a total of 4,784,870 jobs in 2015 versus 2,981,819 for the large enterprises. This indicates that MSMEs contributed almost 61% of the total jobs generated by all types of business establishments. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, the MSME industry has been termed as the engine of growth of developing countries. In our country, this growth is challenged by the lack of funding and of an effective system to secure these funds. It must be noted that banks are wary of lending to MSMEs because of the operational costs and risks of agreements secured by personal property. Further, MSMEs usually do not own real property needed as security in bank loans when these financial institutions prefer real property over chattels. It is therefore the objective of this bill to increase access by MSMEs to more credit at the least cost through the establishment of a unified and modern legal framework for securing obligations with personal property. Under this proposed measure, an obligation may be secured by any of the following. Number 1, any type of personal property. Number 2, parts of property and undivided rights in personal property. Number 3, generic categories of personal property. And number 4, all of the grantor's personal property. Further, this measure shall provide protection for both lenders and borrowers by bringing about a streamlined and simplified process of registering security interests over personal property and the subsequent disposal of these properties after default. The proposed measure comes at a perfect time when investment demand is growing and the desire for self-sufficiency by Filipinos is strong. With this overriding objective of promoting economic growth, I humbly implore my colleagues to immediately help in the passage of this bill so that we, in one concerted action, can unequivocally declare our support to create more jobs, raise more money, enhance technologies, and promote a sustainable economic environment for all Filipinos. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, distinguished colleagues.
May we now recognize Senator Bam Aquino to co-sponsor the measure.
Senator Aquino is recognized.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, esteemed colleagues, mga kaibigan, mga kababayan, magandang hapon po sa ating lahat. Firstly, let me thank the Chairperson of Banks for pushing this measure, Senator Chis Escudero. Maraming salamat, Senator Chis. It's an honor, Mr. President, to sponsor Senate Bill number 354 under Committee Report number 86, entitled Strengthening the Secured Transactions Legal Framework in the Philippines, which will provide for the creation, perfection, determination of priority, establishment of a centralized notice registry, and enforcement of security interests in personal property and for other purposes, otherwise known as the Personal Property Security Act. But before I delve into the bill, Mr. President, I'd like to share some trivia about basketball superstar LeBron James in the wake of today's loss. Sorry na lang sa mga Cleveland Cavaliers fans. Alam niyo ba, Mr. President, na nung high school pa si LeBron, nais po niyang regaluhan ng ina ng mamahaling sasakyan na Hummer para sa kanyang 18th birthday. Ang problema, ang Hummer ay nakahahalaga ng $50,000 at walang pambili ang kanyang nanay na si Gloria. Dahil wala pong pambili, lumapit po si Gloria James sa isang bangko sa Ohio at nangutang. And Mr. President, esteemed colleagues, ang ginamit po niyang collateral ay ang future earnings ng kanyang anak kung siya'y magiging isang NBA superstar. Kapag napasok na raw si LeBron sa NBA, milyon-milyon naman ang kanyang kikitain. At Mr. President, kagulat-gulat po dito, tinanggap ng bangko ang kanyang future earnings bilang collateral. Ang tingin po nila ay ang talento ni LeBron at ang posibilidad na ito'y maging isang NBA superstar. Ang ending po, win-win-win. Gloria got her loan, LeBron got his car, and the bank was paid back with interest. But Mr. President, this wouldn't have happened in the Philippines. Currently, it is land and real property that banks consider to be the most favored form of collateral. and this is not just because of its value. Financial institutions see land and real estate as low risk because it is easy to ascertain that the piece of land has not been used as collateral for any other loan. But with lenders fixated on real property, they miss out on the opportunity to provide loans to a broader group of SMEs and even our farmers. Consequently, many of our countrymen have a difficult time accessing loans from banks and resort to borrowing from friends and family, or worse, resorting to informal loans like the 5-6 system with exorbitant interest rates. This is particularly heartbreaking, Mr. President, for micro, small, and medium enterprises. Friends and colleagues, sa aking pag-iikot, ang laging tanong po sa atin ng mga nagnenegosyo, saan po kami makakautang na mababa lang ang interest? Sayang talaga, Mr. President. Many of our small businesses have so much potential for success and potential to lift families out of poverty. So, Mr. President, we need to address our MSME's lack of access to loans. And this Personal Property Security Act is one of our possible remedies. This measure will encourage financial institutions to lend to more Filipinos by 1, expanding what banks consider as acceptable collateral, and 2, reducing the risks associated to movable collaterals. First, this measure will broaden the utilization of movable assets like bank accounts, accounts receivable, inventory, equipment, vehicles, agricultural products, and even intellectual property rights. Imagine a farmer using his livestock or a craftsman using a contract for a bulk order as collateral for a loan. But, Mr. President, we already recognize a diverse set of movable assets acceptable as collateral for loan purposes like motor vehicles, equipment, and standing crops such as rice or sugarcane. The major challenge of this measure and those tasked to implement it would be to reduce the risk of accepting movable collateral through an efficient, comprehensive, and centralized registry. The Personal Property Security Act pursues the design, establishment, and operation of a unified, centralized, online notice-based national collateral registry to assure banks that the collateral being submitted has not been utilized for another loan. Mr. President, this is not new. In other countries, a simple but effective registry have boosted financing for their local entrepreneurs. In Mexico, the creation of a national accounts receivable finance platform by the government's development bank supported at least 130,000 SMEs through accounts receivable financing. In China, loans with movable assets as collateral now amount to $3 trillion per year. Mr. President, access to a centralized repository of information for movable assets will encourage financial institutions to lend to our MSMEs and even speed up the loan application process. With the personal property security, our financial institutions increase their income by issuing more loans. Filipinos will have better access to lower interest loans, and more Filipino families can grow their business and livelihood for a brighter future. Mr. President, the Personal Property Security Act seeks to replicate this win-win-win scenario for the James family in Ohio, not to help parents necessarily purchase luxury vehicles for their children, but to help parents provide a better life and a better future for their children through sustained livelihood. Mr. President, aking mga kagalang-galang na kapwa senador, ipasa po natin ang Secured Transaction Act, now known as the Personal Property Security Act. At suportahan po natin ang mga maliliit na negosyanteng Pilipino na magtagumpay at umasenso ang buhay. Maraming salamat po, Mr. President, dear colleagues.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1459 under Committee Report 86.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, with the permission of the body, I move to transfer from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders, Senate Bill 108 under Committee Report 81.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
I move to consider Senate Bill 108 under Committee Report 81.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
May we ask Secretary to read the title of the measure?
Secretary so directed.
An act declaring 27 of every year as a special working public holiday throughout the country to commemorate the victory of Lapulapu and his men over the Spaniards led by Ferdinand Magellan in the historic Battle of Mactan on April 27, 1521, to be known as Lapulapu Day or Adlaw ni Lapulapu.
Mr. President, to sponsor the measure, may we ask the Chair of the Committee on Education, Arts and Culture, Senator Chis Escudero, be recognized.
Chairman of the Committee on Education, Senator Escudero is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, distinguished Majority Floor Leader. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues of this August Chamber, as Chairperson of your Committee on Education and Culture, I rise to sponsor Committee Report number 81, which recommends the approval of Senate Bill number 108. The bill, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, proposes to commemorate the historic victory of the valiant Lapulapu, who is regarded as the first national hero of the Philippines who resisted and fought our Spanish colonizers. Lapulapu, unlike other chiefs in the neighboring islands of Mactan who were converted to Christianity, refused to acknowledge the Spanish sovereignty. On April 27, 1521, Lapulapu, together with his men of Mactan, fought and defeated the Spanish invaders led by Ferdinand Magellan. In celebrating this holiday, we remember the valor of the first successful defender of the Philippine shores. Filipinos today, Mr. President, Your Honor, should emulate the courage, honor, and integrity exemplified by Lapulapu and his men in protecting our country from foreign invasion. Mr. President, I hope that this chamber will pass upon Committee Report number 81 containing Senate Bill number 108, declaring this day to commemorate April 27 to be known as Lapulapu Day or Adlaw ni Lapulapu. Thank you, Mr. President. Hindi.
We recognize Senator Mick Subiri to co-sponsor the
Thank you,
measure.
Mr. President. Mr.
Senator
President,
Subiri, recognized.
I'd like to ask the sponsor and the authors of the measure if I can be made co-author of the said measure. Thank you, Mr. President.
Willingly, Mr. President, Your Honor. We thank the Honorable Zubiri for his support.
Thank you. Mr. President, it is indeed a simple bill, but it has been the tradition of the Senate not to pass any measure that has been sponsored on the same day. So I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 108 under Committee Report 81.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved. The minority leader is recognized.
Just so we can close the period of interpellation, if the majority leader will allow, and the sponsor will allow, this is a very simple bill.
Opening the period of interpellation is allowed, Mr. President, but we cannot proceed to approve it on second reading.
Thank you very much. So with the permission of, if the good sponsor will yield to just one question.
Willingly, Mr. President, Your Honor.
Mr. President, since it is declared a special working public holiday, is the employer burdened with premium pay if the workers will work on this particular day?
No, Mr. President, Your Honor. It is the policy of your Committee on Education and Culture not to add to the existing holidays of our country anymore, so as to be an additional burden to employers and businesses. I think we have too many holidays numbering approximately 23 or 24. And it is not the intention of your committee to add to these holidays. In fact, all of these special days that we will be sponsoring this afternoon are all working, and none of them are non-working.
And therefore, April 27 of every year will simply be a ordinary working day.
It is an ordinary working day, Mr. President. We are simply declaring it as such to commemorate the victory of Lapu-Lapu over Magellan on Philippine shores.
All right. With those clarifications, we have no further questions.
Majority leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. May we know what are the, well, I'm tempted to ask what are the other 23 holidays, Mr. President, because this is more important than perhaps the fall of Bataan.
Well, Mr.
This is
President,
the only war that we won.
well, Mr. President, for example, meron po tayong araw ng kagitingan na April 9, which is the fall of Bataan. Meron tayong National Heroes Day, I think, which is in August 28, if I'm not mistaken, August 30. Meron po tayong Rizal Day na holiday din. Meron tayong Bonifacio Day na holiday din. Sa Amerika, may holiday po sila ang tawag President's Day. Pinagsama-sama na po nila si Lincoln, Washington at iba pang presidente para isang holiday na lang. Tayo, pagkabayani ang pinag-uusapan, iba't ibang holiday pa po. I think, Mr. President, the majority leader is correct. It is about time that we reviewed the holidays because we simply have too many. To cite an example, Mr. President, Your Honor, the average salary of a... Sorry ko humaba ng konti. The average salary of a call center agent is about 2,000 pesos a day. So if you have 23 holidays or 24 holidays, That's an additional burden of 48,000 per call center agent, and at 1 million, that's an additional burden of 48 billion pesos on the call center industry, simply because of holidays. If you want to remain competitive, you have to review and look at this with a view to our call center industry located here in the Philippines being more competitive compared to other countries, because I think we have one of the most number of holidays compared to other countries, Mr. President, who are engaged in this particular industry. Sorry for the lengthy answer, Mr. President, Your Honor.
Perhaps we can task the committee of the distinguished gentleman to study that particular idea of at least breaking down or putting together 2 or 3 holidays into one, and perhaps making the Lapulapu Day a better holiday, a real holiday. Because as I said, this is the only war that the Philippines has won. All the other wars, talo tayo eh.
Tama ho yan, Mr. President, Your Honor. I cannot help but agree. Lahat ng pinagdidiwag natin, namatay yung Pilipino o natalo tayo. Maski Holy Week ho, pagkamatay ni Jesus ang pinagdiriwang natin dahil yung pagkabuhay niya, dati ng linggo yun.
Even the Spanish-Filipino Friendship Day, Mr. President, we lost to the Spaniards. So anyway, again, I hope the committee will study that. So in the meantime, I move to...
Just to, if I may,
Yes.
just to,
Senator
with
Gordon,
permission
Mr.
of
President.
both gentlemen, just to further bolster the argument, we have really marginalized Lapulapu and have followed practically what the friars did, because they were so embarrassed by the defeat. And they did, I suppose they didn't want this to become a habit when they come back. They marginalized Lapulapu, and we even marginalized it as a country by calling our favorite fish Lapulapu. In fact, I've heard the President say, and I agree with him, that we should not marginalize Lapulapu further by changing the name of the fish to Magallanes instead of Lapulapu. Magallanes, or Magellan. Magallanes is Castilla. And just to add, Mr. President, to the debate, para kung may magtatanong, I think that we should really honor Lapulapu. In the first place, this is our national anthem. Sa manlulupig, di ka pa sisil. It's all in the emblems of the Philippine National Police. And finally, Mr. President, I guess Lapulapu is the first Asian to ever beat the colonial invader from the West. That's important for us to remember, because we have very little to crow about. And eto nga, tama yung sinabi ni Senator Soto, na nanalo nga tayo rito, hindi naman tayo ang sumugod, tayo ang sinugod. Hindi naman mamamatay tao si Lapulapu, pinagtanggol niya lang yung kanyang what was known as his town or country at the time, even if there was no country. The bravery and the principle of his stand should really resonate before every Filipino. And that is why I remember Senator Dillon and I inaugurated the monument of Lapulapu as a gift from the Koreans in the Luneta, because it really unites the Visayan Muslim and the Tagalog Christian Rizal and the Visayan Muslim in the National Park. I just wanted to make that so that those statements, so that the record will show that we indeed thought about these things. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator Zubiri is recognized.
And not to mention, a former distinguished colleague of ours, Senator Lito Lapid, played a exemplary role as Lapulapu during the Metro Manila Film Festival. Just an anecdote, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 108 under Committee Report 81.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Yes. Mr. President, may we ask the Committee on Local Governments and the Committee on Education to study further this, the holidays, and perhaps we may be able to come up with a legislation that will perhaps be able to come up with a better number of indeed non-working holidays, Mr. President.
Thank you. The minority leader is recognized.
We support the manifestation of the majority leader. In fact, to support it, Mr. President, we move that we adopt a resolution subject to style, directing the committees on local government and education, and who else? Local government and education, and Committee on Labor, to jointly come up with a review of the existing holidays, particularly national and local, and to submit a consolidated bill to the Senate for our consideration. So move in a formal, subject to style as a resolution, Mr. President.
Majority leader.
I concur, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. With the permission of the body, I move to transfer from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders House Bill 477 under Committee Report 82.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Move to consider House Bill 477 under Committee Report 82.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
May we ask Secretary to read the title of the measure?
An act declaring January 23 of every year a special working holiday in the entire country to commemorate the declaration of the First Philippine Republic.
To sponsor the measure, may we ask the Chair of the Committee on Education, Arts and Culture, Senator Chis Escudero, be recognized.
Senator Escudero is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Majority Leader. Mr. President, as your chairperson of the Committee on Education, I rise to sponsor Committee Report number 82, which recommends the approval of House Bill number 477 and Senate Bill number 1323, authored by our Senate President. Mr. President, the First Philippine Republic, also known as the Malolos Republic, was inaugurated on January 23, 1899 at Baraswain Church in Malolos, Bulacan. This historic event paved the way for the Philippines to be known as the first independent republic in Asia. After more than 3 centuries under the Spanish colonial rule, the country's sovereignty was restored and bestowed again to the Filipino people. The passage of this bill will increase public awareness of the importance of this momentous event in our history. Mr. President, I urge our colleagues to support the passage of this bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Majority leader.
Mr. President, to give time to the senators to study the bill, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 477, House Bill 477, under Committee Report 82.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to transfer from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders Senate Bill 747 under Committee Report 83.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Move to consider 747 under Committee Report 83.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
May I ask Secretary to read the title of the measure?
The Secretary is directed to read the title of the measure.
An act declaring July 25 of every year as the National Campus Press Freedom Day.
To sponsor the measure, may we ask the Chairman of the Committee on Education, Arts and Culture, Senator Chis Escudero, be recognized.
Senator Escudero is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Majority Leader. Mr. President, I rise to sponsor Committee Report number 83, containing Senate Bill number 747. Through campus journalism, Mr. President, Your Honors, students are able to practice their right to freedom of expression, opinion, and information. As responsible campus journalists, they have the opportunity of having a deeper understanding of the societal issues in our country and communicating these issues to their readers. The state should also recognize the importance of training these young campus journalists who are the future guardians of our democracy. This bill is also in accordance with every citizen's constitutional right to free speech and expression by declaring as a policy of the state the observance of Press Freedom Day in all educational institutions. I hope that our colleagues will support the passage of this measure. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, to give time to the senators to study the bill, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 747 under Committee Report 83.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to transfer from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders Senate Bill 756 under Committee Report 84.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Move to consider Senate Bill 756 under Committee Report 84.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
May we ask Secretary to read the title of the measure?
The Secretary is directed to read the title of the measure.
An act declaring the 17th of November of every year as National Student Leaders Day.
To sponsor the measure, may we ask the Chairman of the Committee on Education, Arts and Culture, Senator Chis Escudero, be recognized.
The chairman, Senator Escudero is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Majority Leader. As your chairperson of the Committee on Education, Arts and Culture, I rise to sponsor Committee Report number 84 on Senate Bill number 756. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, this bill seeks to recognize the efforts of all student leaders in the country and promote the vital role of youth, the vital role of youth in nation building. We, in any way we can, should support the youth and hone them to be creative innovators and potential leaders of this country. The passage of this bill will certainly affirm the duty of the state to inculcate in the youth patriotism and nationalism and encourage their involvement in public and civic affairs. Mr. President, I hope our colleagues can support me in the passage of this measure. Thank you, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 756 under Committee Report 84.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to transfer from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders Senate Bill 785 under Committee Report 85.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Move to consider Senate Bill 785 under Committee Report 85.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
May we ask Secretary to read the title of the measure?
Secretary is directed.
An act providing a system of extending no collateral, low interest loans to graduates of any courses offered by the Technical Education and Skills Authority or duly accredited learning institutions with approved overseas job contracts.
Mr. President, to sponsor the measure, may we ask the Chairman of the Committee on Banks, Financial Institutions and Currency, Senator Chis Escudero, be recognized.
Senator Escudero is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Majority Leader. As your Chairman of the Committee on Banks, Financial Institutions and Currencies, I have the honor to sponsor Senate Bill number 785 containing Committee Report number 85. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, many of the graduates of various courses offered by TESDA and other learning institutions lose opportunities to work as overseas Filipino workers or as an entrepreneur due to the inability to raise funds necessary to cover placement and travel fees for OFWs or capital for entrepreneurs. Under this proposed measure, holders of national certificates issued by TESDA or any accredited learning institution may secure special loans by government and private banking financial institutions, provided that these OFWs must have approved job contracts that are validated by the Philippine Overseas Employment Administration and that prospective entrepreneurs must present viable startup projects before they can avail of the special loans. Furthermore, the measure requires from a borrower the designation of a person, preferably legitimate spouse or a member of the borrower's immediate family as a co-borrower in order to promote risk sharing and collective responsibility in the payment of the loan. It likewise requires the borrower to attend a counseling seminar to fully inform him or her of his or her responsibilities and the penalties for non-payment of the loan. The bill puts a cap on the loanable amount at 100,000 pesos payable within a period not to exceed 10 years. This amount shall be subjected to interest rates that are market determined to provide lenders the leeway to set the cost of credit based on their assessment of the risks and profiles of their borrowers. With the overriding objective of providing better credit options to members of our workforce, I humbly ask our colleagues to support the passage of this measure. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, distinguished colleagues.
President, to give time to the senators to study the proposed measure, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 785 under Committee Report 85.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to transfer from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders Senate Bill 1252 under Committee Report 99.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Move to consider Senate Bill 1252 under Committee Report 99.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
May we ask Secretary to read the title of the measure?
The Secretary is directed to read the title of the measure.
An act is strengthening Republic Act number 8353, otherwise known as the Anti-Rape Act of 1997.
Mr. President, to sponsor the measure, may we ask Senator Risa Ontiveros be recognized.
Senator Risa Ontiveros is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Majority Leader. Mr. President, in 1996, a Filipino woman by the name of Karen Vertido was raped by her superior in a hotel after he offered her a ride home from a business meeting they had both attended. She promptly filed a case against her rapist And after 8 years of the case going through the processes in our trial and appellate courts, the Supreme Court of the Philippines found in favor of her rapist. Undaunted and aggrieved, Ms. Vertido went to the Committee on Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, claiming that the Philippines violated her right to non-discrimination when, on the basis of wrongful gender stereotyping, the Supreme Court ruled that, simply put, she did not resist her rapist enough. The committee backed Ms. Vertido, and they held that the Philippines, in failing to end discriminatory gender stereotyping in judicial processes, was in breach of our commitments under the CEDAW. Just this year, in February 2017, the Supreme Court ruled against another rape victim. According to her testimony, she fell asleep from dizziness while drinking alcohol with the accused and another friend, and was roused from her sleep when she felt the friend having sex with her. She was afraid that a knife in plain view would be used to kill her if she resisted. When the friend had left, the accused approached her to ask if they could also have sex. And as she could not respond because she was shivering from fright and dizzy from the alcohol, he proceeded to rape her. The Supreme Court, in acquitting the accused, ruled that what she did not do was eloquent proof of her consent. Mr. President, I'm not here to cast aspersions on a co-equal branch of government. I'm here to demonstrate how our laws on rape are woefully inadequate, if not antiquated, and do not provide women the mantle of protection needed against sexual violence. Our age of sexual consent, currently set at 12 years old, is one of the lowest in the world and the lowest in the region. Just for emphasis, we are beaten only by Nigeria, with the lowest age of sexual consent in the world at 11. And we have the same age of sexual consent as Angola, which ranks 117th out of 144 countries in the Gender Equality Index. Despite evidence that the Philippines is leading the way for gender equality, we are number 7, a far distance from Angola's 117. Anachronistic cultural norms still make it difficult for women who are victimized by violence to find redress in courts of law. Many rape victims are subjected to humiliation for daring to report cases of rape, and many perpetrators are let off the hook because of a policy and cultural environment that engenders machismo and blames the victim. It is to this end, Mr. President, that I am sponsoring today's Senate Bill 1252 under Committee Report number 99, entitled An Act Strengthening Republic Act number 8353, otherwise known as the Anti-Rape Act of 1997. This bill proposes the following features. 1, it emphasizes the absence of consent as the essential element of the crime of rape, and specifically includes the phrase, whether or not the victim suffers injuries. 2, it increases the age of statutory consent to 18 years old from the current age of 12 years old. 3, it introduces 3 additional aggravating circumstances, specifically the use of video recording or electronic device during the commission of the rape, the status of the offender as a person of public or moral authority when such authority is used to perpetrate the crime of rape, and the perpetration of rape as a hate crime against marginalized communities. And lastly, it repeals the forgiveness clause, or the clause that allows for the crime of rape to be extinguished by the marriage of the defendant to the accused. Mr. President, this is a bill that is long overdue. It's time to create laws that match the society we envision, a society where men and women are truly equal, not just equal in work and educational opportunities, but equally free from rape and all other forms of sexual violence. Let's protect Filipino women in the most sacrosanct of spaces, in our bodies. Maraming salamat po.
Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. To give time to the members to study the proposed measure, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1252 under Committee Report 99.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, may we proceed with the second additional reference of business?
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Bills on first reading. 1464, an act prohibiting the conversion of irrigated and irrigable agricultural lands for non-agricultural uses, amending for the purpose Section 20 of Republic Act Number 7160, otherwise known as the Local Government Code of 1991, Senator Recto.
Refer to the Committees on Local Government and Agrarian Reform.
Committee reports. Report number 101, prepared and submitted jointly by the Committees on Civil Service, Government Reorganization and Professional Regulation, Ways and Means, and Finance on Senate number 1462 with Senators Lacson, Sani Angara, Trillanes IV, and Ligarda as authors thereof, entitled An Act Providing for Special Financial Assistance and Benefits Granted to Beneficiaries of Uniformed and Law Enforcement Personnel of the Philippine National Police, Armed Forces of the Philippines, Bureau of Fire Protection, Bureau of Jail Management and Penology, Philippine Coast Guard, National Bureau of Investigation, Bureau of Corrections, and Philippine Drug Enforcement Agency, killed or permanently incapacitated while in the performance of their duty or by reason of their office or position, appropriating funds, therefore repealing for the purpose pertinent provisions of Republic Act Number 6963, and for other purposes recommending its approval in substitution of Senate numbers 260 and 1264, Senator Trillanes IV.
To the calendar for ordinary business.
Report number 102, prepared and submitted jointly by the Committees on Civil Service, Government Reorganization and Professional Regulation, Education, Arts and Culture, Ways and Means, and Finance on Senate number 1463 with Senators Soto III, Trillanes IV, Grace Poe, Escudero, Sani Angara, and Ligarda as authors thereof, entitled An Act Granting Educational Assistance and Benefits to the dependents of all members of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, Philippine National Police, Bureau of Fire Protection, Bureau of Jail Management and Penology, National Bureau of Investigation, Philippine Drug Enforcement Agency, Philippine Coast Guard, and Bureau of Corrections who are killed or permanently incapacitated while in the performance of their duty or by reason of their office or position, recommending its approval in substitution of Senate numbers 219, 285, and 1123, Senator Trillanes IV.
To the calendar for ordinary business.
Report number 103, prepared and submitted jointly by the Committees on Agriculture and Food and Finance on Senate number 1465 with Senators Lacson, Recto, Soberi, Cynthia Villar, Ligarda, Joseph Victor Ejercito, Joel Villanueva, Wayne Gatsalian, and Richard J. Gordon as authors thereof, entitled An Act Providing Free Irrigation Service to Small Farmers, revoking for the purpose the corporate status of the National Irrigation Administration, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes, recommending its approval in substitution of Senate numbers 43, 62, 122, 140, 1199, 1412, and 1419, Senator Cynthia Villar.
To the calendar for ordinary business.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader.
with the permission of the Chamber, I move, I move to transfer from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special order Senate Bill 1465 under Committee Report 103.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
With the permission of the body, I move to consider Senate Bill 1465 under Committee Report 103.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
May we ask Secretary to read the title of the measure?
Secretary is directed to read the title of the measure.
An act providing free irrigation service to small farmers, revoking for the purpose the corporate status of the National Irrigation Administration, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes.
Mr. President, to sponsor the measure, may we ask the Chair of the Committee on Agriculture and Food, Senator Cynthia Villar, be recognized. Afterwards, Senator Recto will co-sponsor the measure.
Senator Villar is recognized.
Mr. President, esteemed colleagues, I stand here today to sponsor Senate Bill number 1465, or the Free Irrigation Service to Small Farmers Act of 2017. Under Committee Report number 103, prepared and submitted jointly by the Committees on Agriculture and Food and Finance, with Senators Ejercito, Gatchalian, Gordon, Lacson, Legarda, Recto, Villanueva, Subiri, and this representation as authors thereof. As we all know, we have already paved the way in providing Filipino farmers free irrigation services when we included 2 billion pesos in the 2017 national budget, which will cover the irrigation service fees being collected from farmers. To recall, the National Irrigation Authority was allotted 38.4 billion in this year's national budget, and the 2 billion will cover operating expenses of the National Irrigation Authority and maintenance of irrigation facilities, where they use the irrigation fees or ISF collected from farmers. But that is only for the current year. Thus, there is a need to make free irrigation a policy, institutionalize it to make it more permanent. As I have repeatedly cited, Filipino farmers and fisherfolks are still among the poorest in the country, and freeing farmers from the burden of paying irrigation service fees will significantly reduce production costs, hasten productivity, and increase the income of farmers, because farmers and fisherfolks comprise 40% of Filipinos living below the poverty line. As stated on the Free Irrigation Service to Small Farmers Act of 2017, the state also affirms its commitment to contribute to the lowering of the cost of production of those who cannot afford to pay the irrigation service fees of national and communal irrigation systems, and relieve them from the burden and consequence of unpaid irrigation service fees. The state therefore adopts as a policy the provision of free irrigation service to small farmers. Small farmers, Mr. President, are hereby defined as those farmers whose combined farm holdings cover an area of not more than 5 hectares. Upon the effectivity of the Act, they will be exempted from payment of irrigation service fees for waters derived from national irrigation systems and the communal irrigation systems. Such measure will push the growth and development of the agriculture sector, as well as help our country achieve its food security goals. As chairperson of the Senate Committee on Agriculture and Food, that is really the bottom line. But let me also note, Mr. President, that free irrigation is not the sole solution in enhancing agricultural competitiveness, but it will help farmers, especially small farmers. To cite, irrigation in Vietnam is 8 centavos. In the Philippines, it is 45 centavos, or a difference of 37 centavos. But the bigger difference is in labor. In Vietnam, it is 1 peso and 26 centavos per kilo of palay. And here in the Philippines, it is between 4 pesos and 42 centavos, or a big difference of 3 pesos and 16 centavos. Technology and mechanization is really also the key. According to a position paper of the National Academy of Science and Technology, the cost of irrigation is relatively small compared to the cost of labor and fertilizers. Elimination of the irrigation fee will only reduce cost of production of palay per kilo by 50 centavos. They said it is far from enough to make the rice farmers competitive, and that if we really want to reduce rice production costs, we should target labor cost reduction through mechanization. But free irrigation is free irrigation, and the difference in centavos that it will bring will certainly be much appreciated by small farmers, as it is one less burden for them. And as I have mentioned in many other occasions, those small farmers or family farmers will be the ones to feed us, not the corporate farmers. Even the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization has acknowledged that the future of food is in the hands of small family farmers and fisher folks. We and the future generations of Filipinos will rely on them for food. They are a key to a food-secure future. The proposed bill also seeks the revocation of the corporate status of the National Irrigation Administration, but it shall continue to perform its mandates, power, and functions relevant to planning, development, construction, operation, improvement, repair, and maintenance of irrigation systems. In effect, it will now be a line agency and will cease to be a GOCC. In addition, communal irrigation systems shall continue to be operated and maintained by Irrigators Association. In lieu of the ISF that are no longer billed from small farmers, the national government shall provide for the equivalent funds for the operation and maintenance of the communal irrigation system. Mr. President, there are still numerous barriers that keep Filipino farmers from being more successful and profitable, including lack of technical expertise, inadequate access to cheap credit, and lack of mechanization and financial literacy. As we work on breaking down those barriers, we also have to take care of helping them in their daily burdens and concerns, such as irrigation service fees. Being among the poorest in the country, for them, every few centavos do count. On that note, Mr. President, esteemed colleagues, I seek the urgent passage of Senate Bill 1465 under Committee Report number 103. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. President, to co-sponsor the measure, may we recognize Senator Vic Subiri.
Senator Subiri is recognized.
Thank you, Majority Leader, and to the Senate President. Mr. President, the agriculture sector is still one of the major driving forces of the national economy. A vast majority of our rural population rely on farming or as farm workers for their livelihood, and irrigation is one of the primary factors for the growth of agricultural productivity. However, over 2 million hectares of irrigable lands in the country are still without irrigation. Irrigation, Mr. President, is crucial to increase the productivity of our farmlands, especially the production of major staples such as rice and corn, and is therefore key in ensuring food security of the nation. It also plays an important role in making crop diversification viable, as it enhances multi-cropping even during the dry season. In the Philippines, however, the government has adopted a policy that the water resource is a commodity, and as such, the national government, through the National Irrigation Administration, has been implementing various finance mechanisms to collect irrigation fees from the farmers. Farmer beneficiaries of the National Irrigation System, or NIS, program administered by the NEA and irrigators associations under the communal irrigation systems are forced to pay exorbitant fees. This has led to a substantial amount of expenses for our farmers allotted in irrigation services. As a result, many of our poor farmers, Mr. President, cannot afford to pay these exorbitant fees and lead to huge amounts of unpaid accounts with the NIA. My experience as a congressman, Mr. President, in Bukidnon, I'd always be approached by farmers' organizations to help them settle their accounts with NIA so that they may be able to avail of irrigation services for the next crop season because of unpaid accounts as well, especially when there's a crop loss facing our farmers, Mr. President. The government has justified this practice of collecting the fees by propounding that the funds collected are necessary to pay for the salaries of more than 5,000 NIA employees and workers. Since 2009, Mr. President, the government has entered into the Participatory Irrigation Development Project, or PIDP, a World Bank-assisted project that aims to transform the NIA into a strategically focused and financially viable irrigation service through the restructuring and reform programs in the irrigation sector that will include, purportedly, the rehabilitation and modernization of the NIS, or the National Irrigation System, and rationalization of the NIA. Reconstructing and reforming the programs in the irrigation sector that will include the rehabilitation and modernization of the National Irrigation System and rationalization of the NIA. It is the farmers, however, Mr. President, who are expected to shoulder the payments of such loans from cost recovery arrangements under the PDIP. This is on top of the already high fees being collected by the NIA from farmer beneficiaries who avail of irrigation services. Mr. President, given the strategic importance of irrigation in pursuing sustained agricultural growth and development, rice self-sufficiency, food security, and inclusive growth to our farmers, it should be the obligation of the state to provide free irrigation services. Mr. President, our ASEAN neighbors, such as Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia, give their irrigation for free. And that is why they are more efficient than we are in rice production. And of course, many other factors like mechanization and of course, other inputs that are being assisted to them by their governments. The stakeholders in the agriculture sector, the farmers, the workers, the irrigators, associations have long been clamoring for free irrigation services, the abolition of irrigation service fees collected by the NIA, and for a genuinely progressive program that will accelerate agricultural development in the country. Mr. President, finally, if we can build roads for free to transport our goods and farm products, why can't we build irrigation canals and facilities for free to produce these farm products? Now is the time, and let us seize this moment. In the view of the foregoing, I ask my colleagues to immediately pass this bill. Maraming salamat po, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Subiri, Majority Leader.
Thank you. Mr. President, Senator Recto will deliver his co-sponsorship speech tomorrow, Mr. President, and Senator Legarda. Now I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1465 under Committee Report 103.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, with the permission of the body, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1311 under Committee Report number 33.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, this is the measure on the ease of doing business. Parliamentary status of the measure was in the period of interpellations. I move to close the period of interpellation, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
May we recognize Senator Mig Subiri, Chairman of the Committee on Trade, for the period of committee amendments, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Senator
Thank you to
Subiri,
Majority
recognized.
Floor Leader. Thank you, Mr. President. In accordance to Rule 29, Section 82, Paragraph 2 of the Rules of the Senate, this representation seeks to amend by substitution Senate Bill number 1311 under Committee Report number 33. A copy of the substitute bill has been distributed in advance to all the members of the Chamber to comply with the rules. The substitute bill shall now be entitled the Expanded Anti-Red Tape Act of 2017 to take in consideration the bills amending Republic Act 9485 or the Anti-Red Tape Act of 2007. The substitute bill will consolidate the provisions of Senate Bill number 1311 or the Ease of Doing Business Act of 2017 and Senate Bill numbers 932 and 982, both amending the Anti-Red Tape Act authored by the distinguished Senators Ralph Recto and Senator Ping Lacson, respectively. With the permission of the body, Mr. President, may I now move that the amendment by substitution of the bill, Senate Bill number 1311, be considered as read into the record without prejudice to answering questions from the members of the Chamber after they have studied the substitute bill. After our colleagues have gone over the proposed amendments, we will move for the approval of each one. Finally, at the proper time, if our colleagues wish to introduce individual amendments, we will gladly go through them. I so move, Mr. President.
We have
Is
no
there any
Mr.
objection?
President. We
There
have no
being
objection.
none, motion is approved.
So substituted na. Therefore, I move to suspend consideration, Mr. President, of Senate Bill 1311 under Committee Report 33.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1397 under Committee Report number 57.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, this is the measure on Motorcycle Crime Prevention Act. Parliamentary status of the measure is that within the period of interpellation. May we recognize the sponsor, Chairman of the Committee on Justice and Human Rights, Senator Richard Gordon, Mr. President.
Senator Gordon is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. We are on the period of interpellations, and I understand Senator Dillon has had his interpellations, and as I said last time, we're willing to incorporate the interpellations in the amendments. In the period of amendment, we will submit the amended version, Mr. President.
The minority leader is
Unless there are
recognized.
still interpellations made by the distinguished senator.
Mr. President, we have no objection at this point on the matter, on the bill being calendared for debates. We just want to reiterate that our agreement last week is that bills which are for interpellation or amendment, I'm sorry, that the chamber be notified the week before any bill is scheduled for interpellation or amendment, so that the members of the chamber can prepare on the proposed interpellation. Okay. This bill was included. Well, my staff informs me, however, that this bill was already included, so we interpose no objection.
Thank you.
We have a 1-minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session is suspended.
Huh?
Based sa interpellation. We're ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, I move to terminate the period of interpellation on Senate Bill 1397 under Committee Report 57.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
I move that we open the period of individual amendments inasmuch as this is a substitute bill. There are no committee amendments. So, period of individual amendments, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
May we recognize Senator Dick Gordon for the individual amendments.
Senator Gordon is recognized.
Mr. President, the copy of the amendments have been provided the staff of Senator Dillon, and so with his permission, I can proceed with it unless he wants to do it tomorrow. But I have already submitted the provisions to the staff. that have to be amended pursuant to his previous interpolation. So now I would now like to the bill will now be retitled an act preventing and penalizing the use of motorcycles in the commission of crimes through visible or through visible plate numbers and identification marks and for other purposes, Mr. President. So we've taken out the backriding provision as stated in the previous ones, which said an act prohibiting backriders on two-wheel motorcycles, scooters, and exceptions thereto. And that is how it will read now.
We have a 1-minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session is suspended.
We're ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, in the meantime, we move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1397 under Committee Report 57 after that manifestation. We will take it up tomorrow, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, just to manifest, we're ready, but in the interest of making it orderly and so that the members can read it well, we're going to submit the line-by-line amendment, if any.
Duly noted. Majority Leader.
Sa agenda nag-rumble. Yung ano? Sa agenda, di ba? Yung tulong trabaho. Oh, yan. Yun yung nasa agenda. Yung majority, minority leader. Ang dami nagganong-ganon sa agenda. Hindi, nakailera sa
One-minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session is suspended.
We ready to resume, Mr. President?
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, I move that we adjourn the session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Tuesday, May 23, 2017.
Session is adjourned.
Pangalawa, bukas.